Hello, screenwriters, and welcome to Writing for Screens, Screenwriting Step by Step, Chapter 32, in which I work from step by step through the writing of a drama pilot script that I came up with a rough idea for, and I'm going to show you every step I take until it is a completed pilot script. I am here every weekday, mostly, at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, working on this project and giving you an opportunity to ask me anything. If, for example, you have a life and cannot do that, you can ask me a question anyway. You are not left out. You can just go to writingforscreens.com, click on Contact Me, and you will be able to ask me a question, which I will answer either directly by email or here. And if for some reason you don't feel like doing all that technological connection, you can just comment here in the comments of this or any video. If you ask me a question in the comments, I will get it. I will answer you either there or here. So let us get into today's work, which is undoing a bunch of last week's work. Because over the weekend, I did some thinking. I did some questions. I asked myself some stuff. As I often tell you, go over it and over it. Just keep going through your work, looking at it, seeing where it seems solid and where it seems like it needs work, and then you'll work on those parts. It's actually a very simple way of working. You don't fix the things that are good, and you do fix the things that are not good. And then by the end, it's all good. That's my screenwriting method in a simple proposition. But when you go over it and over it, you have to come at it from different angles. You have to look at it different ways, or there's no point in going over it and over it. You have to say, now I'm going to think about the characters, now I'm going to think about the plot, now I'm going to think about this particular character, now I'm going to think about, are my set pieces big enough, now I'm going to think about my themes, and you just keep going through it and through it, over and over. So that's what I was doing this weekend, and what I was looking for is I'm beginning to get a sense of the outline as this is the shape of an episode. It's got a bunch of sequences, and it's got a progress from beginning to end, and I sort of have a good sense of what that is. I know the major moves, as I call them, the big sections of story. So I started to go back through it to try and figure out the details, the parts where I was like, I have a concept for this scene, but I don't actually have a scene yet. I was looking for the center of each scene, and what I realized is a bunch of the things that I had talked about last week, ideas I had come up with, I don't think they help. I actually think that while interesting, while fun, they're actually getting in the way. The first one was I began to think about the idea that the group, the crime crowd group, was focused on some other killer. And then Xena comes to them with the news of George's death and puts them on the case. And I thought about, is that really worth the time and trouble? Because there's pros and cons, so I actually just sat here and wrote down the pros and cons, which I called advantages and disadvantages because I felt like it. The good thing about doing this is it makes this case and George kind of more obscure. It's like people aren't on the case with him. He seems like more of a loner, which would make him more attractive to Xena as a target. And also it means that the cops would be less on the case, which means our main characters would be more alone and vulnerable. So that was all, yeah, that seems like a good idea. Also, it means that Xena is really making this happen. She's bringing the case to the group. And that's all good. There's more of a sense of change when she does this, more of a sense of the story beginning. Hey, somebody comes in with news. The other good thing is it's less convenient. It's like this whole world is not obsessed with this one killer. There's other ones out there. This is just one little subculture, one little clique. And that makes them more wacky and more outsiderish. And that was the key to them. The problems are, the disadvantages are that it's going to require Xena time to explain to them who this killer is and what George was up to. Originally, I came up with this partly because I thought that was a good idea. That way, in a dramatic scene, Xena would be saying, hey guys, and then frankly do exposition. There was this murderer, this guy did this clue, he got murdered. The problem is, I've already done that. I already did that in the opening sequence. Here, let's take a look at the opening is George working on the podcast and telling us about the serial killer, which means that everything that Xena would be saying in this scene would be redundant. But we need to see her convince these other people to take it. So I've actually made it worse. And I thought this was kind of an interesting thing that I should let you guys see. The writing process is not always an easy straight line. Very often you will take yourself onto a path that's solving a problem or just scratching an itch, scratching a mental itch of like, how can I make this scene more interesting? And sometimes you come up with brilliant stuff with that. Sometimes you come up with brilliant stuff that doesn't help. And that is what we have done. I think I came up with a really interesting bunch of things about this group being into an old serial killer. And you know what? It's not helping. It's getting in the way because Xena is going to have to restate everything we just saw in the beginning of the story. So also, we're going to need to waste time explaining what this other case is that we're just going to drop and never bring back. That is the definition of a bad idea in plotting. To bring up something just in order to introduce a bunch of characters who are then going to leave that place and that problem forever. Bad, bad notion. The advantages to having them already be on the case, one of them is big. They're already invested in this case. They already know, they already care. That's actually not a small deal because what it means is that when Xena comes to them and says, hey, something just happened with this case, she doesn't have to convince them to do it. They would automatically be upset and frightened and excited by this bit of news. So the advantages to doing a group with another thing are small. They are theoretical, and I think we can handle them in other ways. We can make George seem obscure without him being something that they don't know. 99th Precinct is here. 99th Precinct. Hey, good to see you. Thank you guys all for coming. I see a bunch of you are watching right now, and that is cool. So what we have come to is, and I wanted to show you all the work I did to really rationally analyze why my creative impulse last week was a mistake. I just don't think it's worth creating a new group. Having them be invested and knowledgeable, not having to spend time convincing them to get involved, is more important than making George more obscure. That was my verdict on this. So let's do that. Let's get this up here and introduce the group. Where are we here? Okay. All right. So yeah. So this is quite a ways in that we meet the crime club, and so we are just gonna delete this. Lovely as it is, boom, it's gone. And it's too bad, but it was turning into a problem. Um, we still have a lot of questions to answer about this group, but at least I have simplified. And that's really the thing I wanted to talk about here a little bit, was remembering what the point of each scene is, remembering why this thing exists. The purpose of this group is to bring our main characters together and to identify the main characters as part of this subculture. Fully exploring this subculture, which I wish we could do, in the sense of fully exploring all the different things that crime sleuths can do, I don't think we have time. Maybe down the line they'll discuss it when Madeline is asking, what the hell are you people up to? But as far as actually sort of creating a big world picture and then slowly walking ourselves in, we don't have time. So that brought me to the next topic, which was George. Okay. So if we're making George obscure, I started to go through the outline again. And when I got to the very beginning, George and his unsuccessful podcast, I asked the question, who is George? Why did he get so involved in this case that we are going to watch him basically sacrifice his life for it? So I started to ask some questions about George. Why is he into this? Why is he so into it that he would try to provoke the killer? It can't just be that he's desperate for attention, because that's Xena's thing. In other words, it's not like, oh, I think this will get me, a lot of views, so I'm going to make a thing. It pretty much has to be personal in some sense. It has to be something that he's doing that she gloms onto. But I did not want it to be a relative was killed. First of all, it's a little too obvious, but mainly it's rather sad and painful. And I don't want George to be sad. I want George to be ridiculous. I want George to be sort of a joke who we then take more seriously because he got himself murdered. So I just started to brainstorm. What if it's that the case gave him nightmares as a kid? In other words, this would be something that happened 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. So therefore, he would have been a kid. And I thought, these things like Son of Sam. I was actually at 20 when Son of Sam hit New York. But I remember distinctly certain things. Actually, the Boston Strangler. The Boston Strangler was before my time, but the book, The Boston Strangler, which then became a movie, came out when I was maybe 10, 11, 12. And it was my first experience of serial killers, was this book about Boston Strangler. The book, The Boston Strangler, is actually a phenomenally well-researched and stated and grown-up book about a truly brutal and upsetting serial killer. I happened to stumble upon that book when I was like 11 years old or something at some corner bookstore. The paperback had just come out because of the movie, and I read it, and it blew my mind because it was scary. So I kind of like that one. And then, but I thought, or is it something like somebody he knew? Like, was somebody killed, but it wasn't somebody deeply personal. It was just somebody that I was like, oh, that's weird. We know that George was a musician. I had already decided that George and Madeline meet and bond in their youth because they're in a band together. So I know that George at some point was a musician in the early 90s. That makes him a kind of punk grunge guy. Or is it just someone who lived in the house that he now lives in? Did he move into a house and discover that one of the previous owners was a victim? I rather like that, or the nightmares. Not sure, so I was like debating it here in my notes. And And that I think was cool. And so I'm getting all into this. You can see in my notes that I'm talking to myself about essentially most of the choices we make on instinct. This feels right. And then later you look back at the instinct like I just did on the other serial killer story and decide whether it's strong enough to withstand it. It's like every piece has to feel good, but not everything that feels good is going to work. Oh, that's like a great slogan. Hang on. I got to write that down. Has to feel good, but not everything that feels good will work. Man, that's going to be that is definitely a bit for my social media. That's just a great little one-liner. Okay, so the way that you create is you come up like what feels right, what instinctively works, and then you're like later you're like, yeah, but can that hold its place in this story? And that's when I got to this. I said, well, wait a second, hold on. What is the point of what I am doing? The point of George is Madeline. George isn't even a character. He's dead after the first 10 minutes. George is here in the story to bring Madeline in. George is here to tell us about Madeline. So the most important thing about George is that he and Madeline had this relationship 30 years ago. And therefore, I had to think, what is it about him that tells us about her? And what that says is he is what she shut down in herself. This is something we already decided. Well, I already decided, and you watched. At the thing that we know about Madeline and George is that they were married when she was like 20, and they were rock and rollers together. And then things got really bad, so she divorced him, and then she kind of buried that part of herself. So that's what we know most about him. So what was that? What was that thing in him that she was connected to and then closed off? And at first I thought like impulsiveness, The problem is a guy who's impulsive doesn't obsessively hunt a serial killer and build a secret room full of files. So it's more like obsessiveness. And but then I thought, well, did she know that? Was she conscious of that? And I don't think so. I think that the obsessiveness, especially when you're young, very often things that you are turn out to be true parts of your nature appear to be things outside yourself. For instance, I think he was into rock and roll, but the main thing the thing that she would love and then shut down is all or nothing. That's the thing about him. He was addictive, obsessive, and when she met him, he was addictive and obsessive about something, about rock and roll. And they're young, so he hadn't had the chance to give up one obsession and take on another. So all she knew was, man, this guy, he puts it all on the line. And that, I think, makes sense, that when she knew him, it was all or nothing. It was, I will devote myself to this thing. And later, she now realizes it was addictive and obsessive. So that is where I came to on who George was. So I wrote that down here. I put it in green so I'd remember he puts it all on the line. Devotion, determination. These are things that she really loved. Not caring what anyone thinks. Those are things she loved and admired, then got scared off of. Okay, so that was the next topic. The like, who is George? I now have to start to think about how we are going to know that full story of his obsessiveness, but at least I got to start. So I will then say, figure out the full story of his obsessive nature by telling his life after the divorce to Madeline. She has not seen him. She doesn't know him. So that is going to be how we find out, oh, this guy actually is sort of crazy. He sort of has a problem with obsessing. Okay, that's good. I have made a note, so I know to work on that thing next. Okay, oh, Gustavo Coronel, hello, from Argentina. Context, please. The context is I am going back through the outline and trying to refine. I feel like I have the shape of the story. I know the major episodes which make this pilot script, the big moves. But what I don't know is scene by scene, what are the details? So I'm going through it and starting to ask, what is the most useful way to dramatize what has to happen now according to my needs? If you need another motivation, George was once wrongly suspected of being a serial killer. While that would certainly be motivating, I think it's probably a little coincidental and on the nose. It's actually a little too interesting because we're not going to spend any time with George. The George that we know is either the obsessive serial killer hunter or the obsessive rock and roller. So that's already two Georges. I don't think it's a good idea to have three, but I do like the idea of making it personal. Always good to make it personal. Okay, so my next topic was simply a little note I had to myself about Norman, in that in looking at the big shape of the episode, the idea is that Norman unexpectedly gets involved. He unexpectedly reaches out, connects with her, ends up sleeping with her, ends up kind of opening up to her. And then it should be a little bit of a like, well, this isn't my life. This is not what I thought I was going to do with my life. This is not really my thing. I had a great time maybe, but I got to go. I want it to not be too easy for these people to get dragged into this. They don't intend to commit as far as they end up committing. When we meet them, they are not planning to put their lives on the line going against a serial killer. So I just wanted to make that a note, which I will put into the outline, because that's what you do with your decisions and your notes. Get them in the outline. Get them to where the outline is your plan. It's what you are going to do every day when you go to work writing the script. You check the outline and say, what is it? What is it that I have to write about today? So I'm just going to make this a little possible event. Norman is intending to leave when the killer calls. Much as he likes Madeline, he can't just stay here and get into this craziness. Okay, so. Okay, good. Well, that is where we are in the notes up to now, which means that I can take a minute to answer a question, because Kirby asked a question. How many stories should be in a pilot? Just A and B or more? No rules. No, it's not like there's an absolute, like you can have a pilot with just an A story. I mean, it's not impossible. It would be strong. It would be a strong choice, very noticeable, because that's very intense. Should it be A or B or more? as many as you think fit the shape of the story. Um, I think if you think about it, since I believe every character kind of has their own story, there's generally more. There's generally A, B, C, D, E. I mean, I'm just thinking randomly of some good pilots I have seen, um, like Breaking Bad. Walter is clearly the A story, but there's also Jesse is certainly a B story, but there's also Hank and Skylar and her sister Marie, and the son Walter Jr. So and each one of those, they may not have a full story in the pilot, but they are being introduced as potentially meaningful to the larger series. We definitely, so I would say, like in that case, there's like 5 stories at least being introduced in the pilot. Although really it's Walter, Skylar, Jesse. Yeah, kind of Hank though. Hank is important. So the answer is definitely you can just do an A and B, but honestly, you'll probably end up doing more because most series have more. I think it's a Fleabag. There's the father and the sister. I don't remember the characters' names, but and of course the friend. I don't want to spoil anything, but her friend, who her former partner. So therefore, I would say and that's like a half hour, and yet there's at least 4 levels of story being laid in here. My answer is as many as you need. In our case, with our story, there's going to be Madeline and George, Madeline and George, Madeline and Norman, the center, but also the killer and Xena. So we're already talking 4 or 5 levels of story. Madeline and George is sort of a backstory. So yeah, the answer is I know of very few pilots that only have an A or B story. I think you need to treat all of the characters as potential stories, and make them worth that, make them somebody who could matter. Other questions, or am I going to just start winging it here, trying to do some more work on the outline? I guess I will. Hello, Wolf Powers. Good to see you. All right, let's see what we've got here. So, I sort of straightened out what I'm going to do now for the next probably couple of weeks is keep going through the outline and trying to get rid of the pink sections, get rid of the questions, understand the mechanics of the big shape. The big shape I have here is it here? Somewhere here. What I call the major moves. Nope, down here. Okay. The major moves. Yes. So the pilot, the major moves, the big shapes of the story. First, we meet George and the hunt for the killer, and then he is murdered. The next major section is meeting Madeline and the cops, understanding that Madeline is being dragged back into her past because of George's murder, and also introducing Xena trying to get the files. Then we introduce Xena. It's like we start with George's murder, we move out to Madeline, and then Xena comes along, and then we follow that track into the root group where we meet Norman as Xena steers them to save these files. That's sort of the first act. These 3 there isn't a strict definition of acts in a pilot. You can have 5, you can have 7, you can have 3. But for me, the beginning is introducing these main characters: George's murder and the killer, Madeline and her relationship being dragged into it, and Norman being dragged in because he sees what's going to happen to Madeline because of Xena. So we've got those elements. That's really the core of the story. So then the next section, Norman goes to protect Madeline, sort of a wacky sequence, and then they end up unexpectedly. We go from crime comedy to sort of a mini drama or a romantic comedy of Madeline and Norman finding themselves having become lovers without even knowing each other. And then we spend them time getting to know you. So that's like a little section, which I like the idea that you don't really know what this is about until the end of the pilot. There's the murder, but then there's the romance. And then Xena shows up and they discover that George was lying. And then the killer calls and turns it all around by explaining to them that he did not do it and that he's innocent. But also we now know he exists. And so everybody's in danger. That's the shape of the pilot. Knowing that, I can go back now. Like I have that shape in my mind. I try to put it into that simple form just so that I can remember it. I can say, okay, there's about like 8 big hunks of story section there. Are they acts? Who knows? Now I'm going to go through and take them as they come and say, all right, what are the details of how this mechanically is going to work? Why do people do things? How? So we now can say he is obsessive compulsive. And I don't want to get too like psychiatric about this, but at the same time, he has to be troubled. He has to be a person who has ended up in this weird corner of his life, and he does not expect this to be the end of his life. But we need to understand the dark side of his personality being this obsessive compulsiveness. He also should be somewhat fun. I don't want to suggest that he's in the grip of something that we don't, that is all we understand. Okay. After rock and roll, 20s, George's story. After his rock and roll 20s. Now, actually, this stuff is not going to come in here. I'm just writing it here because that's when the question came up. That's when who is this character came up. I'm going to write it here in the outline. Eventually, I will move it to places where Madeline is learning it. He had other obsessions. Name them, which then leads to podcasting about this serial killer. So I'm going to say this is definite. Either he moved into a house which was the crime scene of an early victim, or he remembers his childhood fears of this killer because they were popular back then. Okay, so that's actually a question, not a thing. Or both. And that's actually where I think we're going to end up. There's no reason why he couldn't move into a place and discover that this thing happened and connect to his personal reaction to it. Yes, exactly. This characterization of George explains why Madeline left him, but does not make her a stick in the mud, a person who's no fun, also a person who's unsympathetic to someone who is suffering from an illness, because at that time, it's not entirely clear what she can or can't do for her. We need to understand, I'm just going to put this here, we need to know that Madeline left him to save herself. I'm just going to put that in there somewhere. In other words, she was in a dangerous, toxic relationship with him, even though he's lovable in many ways and admirable in many ways. I'm not sure about the house being a crime scene, only because it seems just too coincidental, convenient. You do want to watch out for things being too easy. But for the moment, I'm going to leave this as a note to refine. Because what are his other obsessions? Well, we're here. I think I'm just going to keep riffing. What are some of his other obsessions? After rock and roll, what was it that he plunged into? Let's see. If this is in the mid-90s. Oh, Y2K. That's it. Y2K. He then became with Y2K. Or possibly with the start of the internet, or Y2K. That would get him going. And then I want something else that I don't know. I'm gonna let that cook for a while. It's feeling like I need to step away. One of the good things that you should learn as a writer when you're on a good roll and when you are spinning your wheels a little. I try to step away from a specific question. I don't step away from writing. I can go on writing. I'll just move to a different part of the outline and work on that. But sometimes if I feel like I'm not gripping the story, gripping the main characters, if my creativity is just spinning out like, oh, he could do this and he could do that, and this is a cool backstory and this could have happened, I got to be wary of filling my outline with stuff that is getting in the way of the story. So that was the feeling I had just now as I was working. And so I said, you know what? I've got a note here. I've got a couple of steps, couple of choices. Step away. When I come back in a couple days, as we have seen from today's work for last week's, I'll be able to tell if something is worth the time that it is being given. All right, so this is 40 minutes. I think, unless there is a question from the crowd, I see that there's a bunch of you on here. I'm going to sign off for today's work. Give you just a minute more. I think the big takeaway from today's session is it's not a straight line. Writing is not a pre-planned, these are the things you have to hit, and then you get to the end and you win. Really, my audio is gone? Huh. Can you guys hear me? Well, maybe I should stop. According to the sound... Okay. I apologize for what appears to be no audio for Alex. Does anyone, just if you're out there, let me know if you can hear me. Okay. Okay, are you making all it during these sessions, or do you think about certain things during the rest of your day? Excellent question. Excellent question. The answer is both. You've seen me sometimes making working, like right now, the stuff I just did was sorry, I'm getting some of you hear me, some of you can't hear me. I don't know. And I'm a little suspicious of some of it. I think there's actually a Europe problem, but I'm not sure. Anyway, Dream Phaser, let me just can continue to answer your question. What I do is, in order to make these videos valuable, I do work before the session and then prepare the notes, and then I go through what I thought in a condensed way. The truth is, if I were writing this script and you guys weren't around, I would be I'm getting trolled. How fascinating. Do I think Belgium is a hoax? Yes. No, Belgium is real and good. I like Belgium. Okay. The actual experience of writing a script, I would work 4 to 5 hours minimum. I would sit down, I would be working on all these questions, I would be expanding my outline. It takes a lot of time because you're sort of groping and you're imagining things. And so the answer is, I was responding to a joke. The answer, I know you're from Belgium, and I know it's good. I am a fan of Belgium. In order to make these videos valuable, I condense a couple hours of work into what I hope is about a half hour's worth of show. And then also, and I usually tell you when I'm doing it, I say, now I'm just going to start working, riffing, making it up as I go along. And I hope that both of those things are helpful. But the answer is no. If you were going to just write a script for a half an hour a day, it would take a lot longer than I hope this will take. I'm hoping that this video series will be mostly done by the end of this year, 2021. I would like to not make it drag on longer than that, because we all have our own work to do. Okay, so does that help you, Dream Phaser? Okay. So, okay. I think I'm going to stop now. I'm going to close out our. We've got a bit of a controversy happening in our comments. I am actually being trolled for the first time in my internet existence, which I kind of take as an honor. But you know what? Enough is enough. Belgium is a good place. I am a fan. Dream Phaser, thank you for your question. And with that, I'm going to say so long, guys. I will see you tomorrow.